Good morning. Welcome SAC members and LTSS subcommittee members and public. This is the Governor's Master Plan for Aging Stakeholder Advisory Committee, SAC meeting, 3.5. We're calling it 3.5 because it is a webinar only and it is single topic. I'm Kim McCoy-Wade, the Director at the Department of Aging and the facilitator of the Master Plan for Aging process with the California Health and Human Services Agency. We are delighted to be at this moment in our process where we get to hear from our LTSS subcommittee, Long-Term Services and Support Subcommittee, about all of their work on a stakeholder report that per our executive order is expected in March, and somehow March is next week. So why don't we start by doing our welcome introductions and overview. I want to start with some meeting logistics. Nelson, can you just go through? We have 51 members of the public who are calling in, and I believe we have a good number of our Stakeholder Advisory Committee here. If one important meeting material you'll want to have is the agenda, but even more so the draft report. They're there on that meeting logistics slide. You will see the materials. And as always, the webinar information we're doing through Zoom. As always, public comments can come in when we do a Zoom through the chat and the Q&A feature here, but also through our website, engageca.org. Can you do next slide? Next slide. There's our logistics summarized. And then the next slide is our agenda. I'll do a brief overview, and then the majority of the meeting will be the briefing by our LTSS subcommittee reps who are here. Susan Damaris from the Alzheimer's Association, who's both on the subcommittee and is a member of the Stakeholder Advisory Committee. Lydia Miselides from the Alliance for Leadership and Education. Claire Ramsey from Justice and Aging, and Sarah Steenhausen from the SCAN Foundation, supported by our consultant from UC Berkeley, Dr. Carrie Graham. They will walk us through the report. We'll have a chance for some clarifying questions from SAC, but really this is meant to be a briefing to ground everybody, and then public comment as always, and closing next steps. So let's do that overview about why we're here and what we're doing today. Next slide. As I mentioned, the majority of this is in-depth briefing, a moment for clarifying questions and public comment. Importantly, this is the pre-meeting, the pre-game, if you will, for our normal SAC meeting on Monday. Next slide. This is our typical March 2nd meeting, and we will do a very brief recap of the report, but we don't we want to dedicate our time to the full discussion, the full public comment, and then importantly, SAC action. This is our last SAC meeting, our only SAC meeting in March 2nd at this point, and in order to meet the requested deadline of the executive order, this would be the date for SAC action on Monday, March 2nd. So again, today we'll do this in-depth policy briefing so that you can have it and be thinking about it, and then come together for our normal SAC meeting for a recap, full discussion, and action. Now, one of the questions, next slide, that the SAC asked at our last meeting in January is, what are we going to do with this report? And a small group of you volunteered to be on a SAC process work group. Thank you very much. To think about how did SAC want to process this report. And here were the proposal for SAC: that accept the report, very close to final from LTSS, and allow for a process for edits to be submitted. Didn't want to spend valuable meeting time doing wordsmithing and line editing, but allow a channel for SAC to send edits for the subcommittee to consider, being mindful not to reopen things that have been discussed over 3 months, but really having that chance to catch important edits. The SAC has been very focused on wanting to deliver to the administration in March, and the suggestion is a cover letter that would list, quote, top opportunities for policymakers to act on now, unquote, to lift up among the currently 28-page report, 140 recommendations, some immediate action items was the SAC suggestion. Aiming to do that by late March per the executive order deadline, mid-March, that no firm timeline there yet. And then of course, continuing to work with the LTSS subcommittee, because while this stakeholder report is an important milestone, it is not the only or the last opportunity to inform the 10-year master plan with state priorities, local blueprint, data dashboard indicators, and best practices to turn from. So that is the current SAC proposal. To support that, the work group suggested that the SAC have some homework after this webinar. Next slide, please. The two homework requests is that after you hear this webinar, as you're hearing the presentation, you're reading the report, if you have ideas of what you think the top opportunities for policymakers to act on now, please send them to SAC member Jeannie Parker Martin, Leading Age, for compilation. This is a straw poll. This is a temperature taker. This is just a chance to see what you think. We know it will not be all of you. We know not all of you may have a chance to weigh in, but this will help the SAC planning group see where everybody is. If you, by some chance, do not have Jeannie's email, feel free to email Engage or any of us and we'll send it to you. We just didn't want to put it on blast given spam these days. But we're asking for, Jeannie's asking to hear from you today. Bullets, all great. And again, there will be a process for line edits to the report. If you can send those to the Engage email box by next Wednesday, LTSS subcommittee can take those under consideration again. So those are welcome, but we want to, the SAC's direction is to really focus on those top opportunities. I think I've done a fair job of summarizing that. So then let me share a little bit what the LTSS subcommittee is asking to do, and we'll see how these fit together. They'll bring this report on Monday for more discussion and action. They've asked for a chance to finalize it with more graphics, more personal stories, some of those line edits that come in, and are hoping to do that mid-March. Got a meeting March 10th scheduled. My understanding was there was also a request to do kind of an executive summary or early ask piece by mid-March. And then, of course, they have surfaced in their deep dive into LTSS that, as we all know, there are cross-cutting issues. There are things about housing, transportation, healthcare systems, more. And so wanting to make sure those recommendations get transferred over to those new SAC work groups and possibly come with LTSS members who are willing to keep working in some cross-cutting ways. Of course, continue to advise the SAC on LTSS and work with the research subcommittee building the dashboard to make sure that we have the data indicators, data measures, data gaps, and ongoing evaluation included. So LTSS, again, while this is a milestone, they are not done. There's more they want to do and will do, and we're so grateful for that. So with that process level set, let me just check for a second and see if there's been any questions or chats that have come in from anyone else, anybody with questions at this point about where we are or why we're here?
No questions.
Wonderful, then I will stop talking and get out of the way and let our experts lead us through this truly, truly wonderful piece of work that there has been so much expertise, collaboration, sweat equity, creativity gone into. So we're so grateful for being at this point and look forward to seeing where we go next. With that, Lydia.
Thank you, Kim, for those kind words and inspirational words. I appreciate the opportunity to provide an overview, or at least lead off our discussion on an overview of the LTSS subcommittee report in advance of the meeting next week. And my job is to provide you with a bit of an overview before we dive into the actual recommendations. So as one of the 21 members of the subcommittee team, I think I speak for all of us in expressing our strong commitment to the goal of contributing and creating to a truly actionable master plan for aging. The LTSS report is not the master plan. We're very clear about that, but we do want to continue to collaborate with the SAC committee and others to finalize the report over the next few months. It's really been an intense 4 months of work to meet this deadline, but we're going to meet the goal. In the process, because of this intense time frame, we've really formed a strong bond among the subcommittee members and a really great working process. And we will continue to use our collective knowledge and energy to contribute to and support each of those 4 bold goals that are outlined in the executive order and work with those other committees and work groups that are ongoing. So next slide. Just wanted you to see our subcommittee members and make note here that it does span, the committee members do span a diverse sector of the community of long-term services and supports. We've got providers, advocates, unions, consumer groups, health plans, and government and private sectors are also represented. And of importance, 9 of our members are currently members of the SAC. So we've got a great cross-pollination between the 2 groups, as Kim just mentioned. So next slide. As you can see from this slide, it's very dense, but the main thing I think the takeaway from this is we began meeting in person just about 4 months ago today. And that is 36 hours of in-person meetings reflected so far, but that does not convey all of the behind the scenes work that has gone on. With subgroups meeting, people talking in between meetings, we have really put our shoulder to the wheel to make this thing happen. So we're very pleased to be able to present you the third draft of the report today and give you this overview. It has been amazing to see. I believe now we're over 1,000 public comments, but a reflection of the interest in what is going on. We've got 200 specific recommendations, more than that actually. And some of those recommendations are multiple recommendations in one document. So we've got a lot of input from the written comments, from listening sessions that IHSS, DSS held, that informed these recommendations, government partners, the SAC, the Equity Work Group, the Research Committee. We heard all of those comments and took them in consideration. And I have to say, this really intense time frame has sharpened our collective focus. And we really, truly appreciate all the input, the fast turnaround times, and the valuable comments from the public who took the time to engage. So our goal in the report, as you'll see now when my colleagues present the 5 big ideas, has really been to reflect what's important to older adults and persons with disabilities, break down silos of thinking and services, and prepare recommendations that benefit all Californians, not just those receiving government services. So thank you to all who've contributed to this and engaging on the report that you see before us today. So the next slide will talk a little bit about the process, and that'll orient you to the way the report is organized. As I mentioned earlier, because of the time frame and because of the volume of recommendations that we were charged with taking a look at, we broke up into subgroups led by captains who gathered up all of these ideas, reviewed public comments every step of the way, and then assembled to propose recommendations. And then from this exercise, we determined that the recommendations that came in lended themselves to 5 big ideas or themes. So this began to emerge as the recommendations were being discussed. And in the report, you'll see that we call them objectives because we wanted to mirror the executive order that lays out goal statements. We then regrouped these individual recommendations, not by the subject matter like IHSS or residential care, but we grouped them under these big ideas as our organizing principle. And the LTSS writing team was then charged with creating a document that flowed with one voice and applied these guidelines: be clear, concise, use active voice, plain verbs, action verbs, plain language, and focus more on the what and less on the how. There's a lot of different ways to get to the what's. And remarkably, I think, in a demonstration of how well the subcommittee works together, we arrived at a consensus on all of the recommendations you see. But I do want to caution you, this does not mean agreement on every solution. So you will see that a handful of our recommendations have been carefully written as a consensus statement that defines the issue, but not necessarily the solution. And these are issues that have remained out of reach for consensus building for some time. We were unable to solve them in 4 months of meeting together, but I'm very pleased to say that there's an expressed desire to continue to meet and try and tackle these issues. So as Kim said, our next task is to quickly identify recommendations that are ready for action this year, and we will begin to identify others for 2021 action. As we know, there's urgency to get going. And we agree, all of the recommendations are important. We know some will take longer than others to implement. I do have to say, I think, speaking for myself, but I think for the feeling of our group, that we have confidence in our ability to recommend steps to be taken this year that are going to make a difference in people's lives in the short term and not wait for 10 years for something to have an impact. So with that, I'm going to turn to my friend and colleague, Claire from Justice and Aging, and she's going to walk us through the first 2 big themes.
Hi, can everyone hear me? Thanks, Lydia. I'm excited today to talk to you first about our vision and values for moving forward on the LTSS subcommittee report. Can we go to the slide that says vision, please? So we really wanted a strong shared vision, and we believe that that's what's going to guide our transformation of the long-term services and support system. We are really trying to create, to use a vision that will help us create a system and services that really honors the needs, values, and preferences of individuals and their caregivers. There has been a lot of discussion and a lot of real significant passion for making sure that the person is always at the center of the work we are doing and that it is guiding our thinking and our choices and our decisions. We want to have a system and services that are culturally responsive. As was Lydia mentioned, we have heard initially from the Equity Committee, but also we were working very hard as a subcommittee to reflect those values throughout our report and to make sure that they were a running theme and embedded into all the work. We also want that to extend to our workforce because currently the LTSS workforce is very reflective of California's diverse communities, and we really want any solutions and any changes to continue to reflect that diversity. And then we also really think it's vital to build on a foundation of financing and public policy that is really goal-oriented on two things. One is to reduce institutional placements. You know, one of our guiding principles has been the goal that people get to live where they want, you know, where they want and make those choices for themselves. And overwhelmingly, people want to choose non-institutional placements. And so we really need to create systems that allow that choice to happen. And then we also really want to put in place services and supports that underpin quality options in all our communities. If we can go to the next slide. So with that vision in mind, we decided as a LTSS subcommittee to affirm and adopt the values set forth by the SAC, which were hopefully will feel very, very familiar to you, but I will run through them quickly, which are choice, equity, dignity, inclusion, and partnership. And again, those big values helped us think about the 5 big objectives that we are going to present today. They also made us realize how much we wanted to have bold solutions. And part of those bold solutions were a real recognition of the importance of gubernatorial leadership. One of the jobs of the LTSS subcommittee was to stay firmly within our goal 1. And as part of that, you know, we saw how things interconnected and how much overlap there was between work. And as part of that, we really wanted to raise up the idea to the SAC of potentially proposing that the governor create a cabinet level position around aging so that they could lift up the importance of the master plan and ensure successful implementation. And we think that particular value is bigger than just LTSS, but is vital to the LTSS work getting done. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Susan.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're pleased to be here sharing with you, and we welcome your feedback starting this afternoon and Monday at the next Stakeholder Advisory Committee meeting. I am going to share with you now the graphic that we thank AARP for developing this graphic. On the next slide. A visual illustration for everyone of what this LTSS report represents. And there was a lot of thinking behind this vision that we wanted to share with you. First, we wanted to demonstrate the interdependence of the issues and the connectivity between local, regional, and state, the connectivity between the private sector and the public sector. And importantly, we wanted most of all to place the person, the individual who needs LTSS at the center of the circle. And the individual is surrounded by a circle of support. And that circle includes family members, friends, local community organizations, nonprofits, the private sector, and government partners. At the top, we show leadership, and then in this circle, you will see the 5 big ideas that we're outlining shortly, as well as the values and principles that Claire just shared with you. So this is a visual representation of what the report includes. On the next slide, quickly, we'll talk about, you heard from Lydia about the incredible volume of inputs over a short period of time. Our first task as a work group was to organize an enormous amount of content into these big idea areas. The big ideas reflect to us what matters most to Californians. And we sought to describe these big ideas in a way that multiple audiences would understand. This report has multiple audiences, certainly the public, the governor and the Newsom administration, the legislature, and our partners in the private and government sectors. In brief, I'll just touch on each of the 5 areas, and then we're going to go into a little bit more detail on each of them. For the first one, a system that all Californians can navigate. In brief, this means, how do people get started? Where do they go initially when they need help? Who can they trust? And who do they turn to find out what's next in their process? Because for many Californians, LTSS is a progression. It's not a one and done activity. It's a sequence of services over a period of time. On the second objective, access to LTSS in every community. Here, we really endeavored to match the LTSS need with a program or service, and it was glaring to us as a work group that there is imbalance throughout the state, inequity statewide, that depending on where somebody lives or their payer source, the services that are available, there's wide variation among the services that are available. So a primary objective here is to ensure access statewide for all Californians. With the third objective, affordable LTSS choices, Medi-Cal is absolutely a part of this, of affordability for sure, especially for Californians with limited resources, Californians on restricted incomes, and Californians with no retirement savings. But affordability is much bigger than Medi-Cal, and you'll see in this objective area that we attempted to address the needs of the missing middle and individuals in California who are expected to pay for their own care with cash out of pocket. It also includes how our state budgets and finances long-term services and supports programs. So it's for the individual as well as state financing. With the fourth objective, we talk about a highly valued, high quality workforce. You will see in this objective a strong emphasis on the direct care workforce, those who are delivering daily home and community-based services to individuals, consumers, clients, and beneficiaries. It also includes the unpaid informal workforce, the 4 million or so Californians who are caring for family members and friends on an intermittent or ongoing basis. And what this doesn't include would be more of the professional workforce, physicians and nurses, because that is addressed in another goal area around healthy aging and healthy living. And the fifth objective, state and local administrative structure. We chose to place this last, although it's foremost in our thinking, and you'll see when you go back to the graphic that leadership is at the top of the circle. But we really want the structure to support the objectives above it, to organize state and local government in a way that can deliver on the 4 objectives above, and in collaboration and in partnership with the private sector, nonprofit organizations, and all levels of government, including the federal government as a partner.
Great.
So now,
Oh, I'm sorry, Susan.
No, go ahead.
It's you.
Thanks, Susan. This is Claire again. I get to walk you through the first two objectives, and I'm actually very excited to do this because what I think we've really tried to accomplish here is to take on real responsibility for SAC's direction around what are the big ideas here. And one of the things for us that really meant was the big ideas needed to be concrete in a way that we could see if we were creating the change we wanted. So we did try to write these in a way that felt measurable, and that as the plan is implemented and all these recommendations are hopefully put into place, and possibly new ones as things evolve, we can see if we are getting toward these objectives. So our first one, a system that all Californians can navigate, I'll just read you the simple sentence, is California will have an understandable, easy to navigate LTSS system that connects people to services they need, regardless of where they live or their economic status. We put this objective first because to us, this was the entry point into the system and sort of where things needed to start. And why was this objective important to us? Well, it's because currently California's private and public system is very complicated and it's not well coordinated, which makes it very hard for people to people who need the services and caregivers who are helping them and other people who are helping them sort of navigate the system. And what we saw were real life consequences to this. It means you maybe can't get what you need, or you never are able to find out that there's a service in your area that can help you. So if we can go to the next slide, we've, in the interest of not having slides with a million words on them, oh, I'm sorry, one back on the slide to the, yes, thank you. We've just put out some highlighted recommendations, but before I go to these specifically, I do want to mention how the report is laid out, which is, for those of you who are just having their first sort of interaction with it, starting on page 8, we basically rephrase the main objective and then have a series of more specific recommendations that are grouped by sort of type of recommendation. And within objective 1, where we're really looking at navigation of the LTSS system, we saw there to be several different things that we needed to think about and put out specific recommendations about. So the first one is sort of the frontline relationship between people and the system. So that's sort of the frontline systems and maybe what people most often think about when they think about how can somebody navigate. So these are things like information and assistance systems, the aging and disability resource connections, programs, sort of whether or not there's easy access through multiple forums like web portals and ways to call and connect through seamless systems. So you'll see there are a number of recommendations to basically think about what exists in the state already. So for example, information and assistance is something that exists, but this is a much broader set of recommendations than simply expanding one particular program. What we're really trying to create is a system where Californians have multiple points of entry, that no wrong door idea, and that people can get to the services and link to the services they need. So that's sort of we have a number of recommendations on frontline systems. Next, we have some recommendations about streamlining and standardizing screening and assessments and data sharing. I just want to be clear, this was one of the ones we really had to think and talk through. This is not reviving the idea of a universal assessment. Instead, this is the idea of how can we have systems work better together? How can we securely, confidentially share information where appropriate? How can we make it so the individual is not constantly answering the same questions repeatedly? And then the next thing we looked at that we think is part of navigation is how does the infrastructure work behind the scenes? So we have recommendations related to what I am understanding as of yesterday is now called CalAIM again, no longer formally known as CalAIM, but just simply CalAIM. So we have very specific recommendations about how to improve the CalAIM implementation for older adults and people with disabilities, and also how to potentially improve coordination and integration for those who are on both Medi-Cal and Medicare. which is more than 1 million people in California currently. And lastly, within this objective, we have improvements to IHSS around administration specifically. So how to simplify administration, how to improve public authorities' ability to provide services, including their registry and training services, and how to improve coordination between the IHSS program and other long-term services and supports, explicitly without having to move IHSS. We do not want IHSS moved into managed care, but we would like to see coordination between those pieces. So I'm hoping that's a good broad overview of objective 1 for you all, but there's a lot of detail in there. We're really excited to have you engage with that detail. Next, I'd like to go to objective 2, which is access to LTSS in every community. And again, I'm going to start by reading the objective. California will have the country's most comprehensive LTSS system where people can find and afford the services they need and choose where and when they need them. And a couple things. So this is the biggest recommendation, this is the biggest objective in here in terms of number of recommendations. There are a lot of components to how to improve access. And to understand how this connects to objective 1, we want there to be navigation for people, but you have to have something to navigate them into. And so one of the things we don't want to assume is that simply by making it more simple for people to access the system, that their services behind the navigation will be there for them. So objective 2 is really about making sure there's a robust set of services for people to be referred to. And the LTSS recommendations really span a broad amount of recommendations. They deal with IHSS, in-home supportive services, and other home and community-based services. They also deal with residential and institutional long-term care options. So we were really looking at the breadth of available LTSS and trying to make recommendations within this. And the reason we thought this was important was because, again, this sort of is the backbone of whether or not people can get the things they need. And as you'll see, a lot of these recommendations are about improving and expanding what exists to some extent. And some of what you will hear about in objective 3 involves sort of what are the new things that can help make the system affordable. But in recommendation 2, we have a lot about investing in public and private infrastructure, expansion for local communities. Now that that recommendation is really trying to get us to a place where there's equitable access across the state. Currently, there are pockets that are very resource rich, and there are lots of other pockets of the state where that is not true. And so we really want to raise up the ability of all communities to provide the LTSS services that are needed. Next, we also decided to include recommendations to create and expand access to equitable and affordable Medi-Cal. And one of the questions was whether or not this belonged in a different set of recommendations and under a different goal. But we really felt it was necessary to address it here because for so many, the only way they will access LTSS services is through the Medi-Cal program. This acts as a gateway into all those services. And so we felt those recommendations were really vital to creating a robust LTSS system in the state. Another big charge of ours, as I'm sure everyone was aware, was really to look at IHSS. It is an enormous program in the state. It serves more than 600,000 people currently, and it's, providing overwhelmingly huge amount of paid care in the state. And so we really took that charge seriously. We had significant discussions about making sure that it's stable and sustainable into the future. We, as a collective group, really value the IHSS program. We see it as a foundational program and want it to continue on for many years to come and to be able to absorb the number of people into the program that it will need to absorb while remaining fiscally secure. Additionally, we do want to see that there is equity and access in IHSS, including for a wide variety of groups, and we've made recommendations there. And then lastly, we have also looked at ways to strengthen quality and choice in residential settings to ensure that people, again, this is about choice. So for some people, at some points, residential care may be what's preferred, what's required, and we want to make sure we have a strong system in place, even while making sure we have a very robust offering of home and community-based services. So with that, I'm going to turn this back over to Sarah to go through the next objectives.
Great. Thank you. Are we on mute? Okay. Thank you so much, Claire, and to my colleagues as well for the wonderful overview of the report. I think at this point, we've had an excellent summary of the first two objectives that really address the importance of, well, first, overarching leadership. But second to that is the pathways to ensure that our system is easy to navigate. And then second, as Claire just walked through, the importance of ensuring access to the services and supports that they need, that people need to live with dignity and independence, and ensuring that we have the infrastructure to, for the access to meet those needs. But even if you fulfill those objectives, we still have a really significant challenge. If we have a wonderful system that is easy to navigate, how do people pay for it? We all are very familiar with the fact that individuals cannot afford the cost of LTSS. Some people don't realize that Medicare doesn't pay for it. It is bankrupting families and consumers. So one aspect of this objective focuses on developing a statewide universal benefit program to address the individual's needs and to avoid having to spend down to go into poverty, which we'll talk about in a moment. But the second component, and equally as important part of this objective, is for our actual system financing. We recognize that right now, California's financing of LTSS is a mixture of state general fund, some federal fund, and some other sources as well, but there is really no stable funding stream. And primarily, a lot of this is rooted in the fact that home and community-based services are seen as optional services in the community. We want to equalize access to home and community-based services and ensure that people can access both home and community-based services in the setting of their choice, but as was indicated, also the residential services in 24-hour settings as they may need. So if you go to the next slide, we'll talk specifically about what our recommendations address in this objective. So the first recommendation is to create a LTSS financing program for the middle class. This is a public benefit option that we've seen other states do, such as Washington, that can be financed through different mechanisms, such as a payroll tax, that would provide a daily benefit for a specified population of people that meet eligibility criteria and up to a certain capped amount. This is something that's in the concept is being developed. There's an actuary analysis underway right now, and it's something that the state has supported exploring through investment into the actuary analysis. Based on the findings of the analysis, we'll have a better sense of what a potential LTSS financing program could look like, how it might be structured, and how it might be financed. And again, this would really be addressing the needs of the middle class people who right now are at risk of spending down all of their resources and becoming impoverished and having to go on to Medi-Cal. So this is a way to create a cushion and to ensure that the state doesn't have as many people needing Medi-Cal for LTSS, and that individuals have a way at least of slowing the rate at which they need to spend down to Medi-Cal eligibility so that they can afford the LTSS that they need. But the second recommendation that we are really think is extremely critical is getting to this issue of the dedicated funding stream at the state level. So we want to see the state establish a dedicated funding stream, but with that also establish a right to home and community-based services. So for an example, since the federal government provides a right to institutional services under Medi-Cal, we want to see this right extended to home and community-based services, but not just for people on Medi-Cal. We believe that people who are in the middle class, maybe up to about 600% of federal poverty level, should be insured access through a dedicated funding stream to home and community-based services. Clearly, this would take a lot of development and thinking, but we know it can be done. We've seen through examples such as the Lanterman Act that individuals with developmental disabilities have the right to home and community-based services according to their needs and preferences. But we also recognize that other services need that it's not the state paying for everything, but that it would be generic services would follow first, and then the state would fill in where other funding sources don't meet the need. So that is we see as a very big, bold objective recommendation that we see as a really critical component of the master plan. But then the third recommendation in this is kind of a lot of new innovation happening in the Medicare program, looking at ways that the Medicare program can start supporting LTSS programs and services for people on Medicare, establishing new ways to pay for LTSS and better streamlining the service delivery across the Medicare program for not just Medicare covered services that are more medical in nature, but also LTSS that are so sorely needed for people on Medicare. So that summarizes our recommendations in the affordability category. And now I will turn to Susan, who will focus on the objective 4 of our high quality valued workforce.
All right, hello again, everybody. So despite advances in technology, LTSS remains today and likely for the next decade to be a very labor-intensive endeavor, reliant on human capital. And as our population ages, our workforce is shrinking. So our supply and demand, even today, we have huge shortfalls in the health workforce today. And those projections will only grow over the next decade. So in Objective 4, you see a number of recommendations related to the workforce. First, with the paid workforce, we will need to grow the direct care workforce, individuals who provide in-home care, home health care, care in congregate settings such as adult daycare and adult day health care, the staff working in residential care facilities for the elderly and skilled nursing facilities. We will need to grow the workforce by up to 1 million jobs. And that will entail wages and benefits, as well as training, education, and advancement opportunities to provide career ladders. But the backbone of our long-term care workforce continues to be unpaid family caregivers who far outnumber the paid workforce. And to support family caregivers in that role, be they family or friends, we need to expand job protections for all caregivers, so paid family leave, as well as providing training and support through respite and other means so that caregivers can perform that, provide care to their loved ones in the home, and also caregivers provide a good deal of support to family members and friends, even in residential settings. So we'll move to the next slide. With the recommendations, this also was a very dense recommendation area. The first is to expand the workforce to increase the number and attract people to aging services, and to start on that now and to improve working conditions. These typically are very low wage jobs, and we see a lot of turnover in the workforce because of the low wages. There's a lot of mobility, so the individuals who are served don't benefit from the continuity of care that they deserve. Secondly, we need to strengthen our statewide IHSS workforce, and a strong recommendation is to take collective bargaining statewide so that we stabilize the IHSS workforce and the program. To build a dementia-capable workforce, as our population ages, we see a far greater increase in the number of individuals living with Alzheimer's disease and all dementias, because age is the greatest risk factor for Alzheimer's and dementia. And this is not normal aging and requires specialized training among the workforce and family caregivers. We need to invest in workforce education and training. So be it individuals in the IHSS program who are providing one-on-one direct care, or individuals who are working in congregate settings such as adult daycare, or in licensed 24/7 residential settings. Education and training improve the quality of care. And it has also been proven to retain individual employees when they're provided with education and training. And last but not least, we need to support family caregivers who increasingly are younger, many who are in the workforce themselves. Millennial caregivers are on the rise, and we need to make sure that our policy and leave policies keep step with our unpaid family caregiver workforce.
Great, thank you so much, Susan. This is Sarah speaking again. And I think that what we recognize through all the 4 objectives is that they all have direct impact, not only at the system level, but most importantly at the person level, whether it's talking about access to the workforce or financing or services in our infrastructure or how we navigate the system. But something that's not often experienced by the consumer is how the state and local government and private sector is structured to coordinate and lead in service delivery for older adults and people with disabilities. So what this objective really tries to address is how we may best align the administration of LTSS across departments, how we can coordinate LTSS across the departments at the state level and local level, as well as how can we promote seamless access to services and integration while also driving innovation by how these structures are established at both the state and local level. So the next slide, if you could move to it, we'll talk about some of the recommendations in this. So there was a lot of discussion about, for years, this is not a new issue that's been raised about. We all recognize that our system is highly fragmented, and some people say that the fragmentation is due in part to how the state level is structured and how you have a number of programs and services for older adults and people with disabilities across several departments at the state level. So it's one thing that the committee wholeheartedly agreed to was that any effort to explore how to better align services at the state level needs to ensure that it will only result in improvements in service delivery at the local level for the person. So we think it's really important that starting at the state level, at the agency, Health and Human Services Agency, create a new unit that's focused on long-term services and supports, because we recognize that right now these services are spread across the departments of healthcare services, aging, rehabilitation, social services, public health, and developmental disabilities, and others. And that the Health and Human Services Agency really has an important role to play in convening those entities and developing policies and considering how we might align services most effectively in those departments. But second to that is more at the departmental level, there was a significant discussion on how we might explore reorganizing departments, and specifically the structure of the Department of Aging, to look at the alignment of services for older adults and people with disabilities who, with the goal of increasing access to home and community-based services. So what the committee came down to was that, we didn't want to have a recommendation that just wholeheartedly said this is how you should do it and what you should do, but they felt very strongly that the state should have a very focused discussion on how this might look and how it might play out at the local level, with, again, the focus being to better coordinate and streamline the delivery of services for the older adult and people with disabilities and their families. Third is flowing from the state level down to the local level. There's been a lot of discussion about, across area agencies on aging and the county structure, as well as aging and disability resource connections. How might we better integrate services across all those entities, again, with the goal of better streamlining service delivery and easing access to those programs at the local level. This was a really, really bold proposal that the committee didn't have the opportunity to delve into in great detail. So we think it's a really important issue for the state to continue discussing in partnership with the counties and with stakeholders to consider the feasibility of integrating these aging and adult services at the county level. And then finally, there's been, a lot of the fragmentation at the state and local level stems from the fact that we have a very fragmented budgeting system. And for a number of years, we've heard of other states and models that have developed more global budgets that are focused on long-term services and supports that allow for more flexible funding so that you can better plan for and meet services based on individual need rather than based on the silos of departmental budgets that oftentimes don't have the capacity to meet need because they are structured in with specific budget limitations. So that's really a longer term policy that we hope the state can begin exploring that aligns well with the goal of better integrating and streamlining access to services. Done with that one.
Well, I think that was the big finish.
That was the big finish.
So first of all, kudos for being right on time, down to the minute, but much more importantly for really the deep and rich work that's happened over the last 4 months and that was presented so clearly and so compellingly just now. So thank you to all of you. We are going to open it up for SAC kind of clarifying questions. You can do so either, I'm going to ask Nelson to explain the different ways that the SAC members who are all in the Zoom call as panelists are able to ask questions. How can they ask questions?
Thanks, Kim. So to enter the queue to ask questions, click the participant icon on your Zoom panel, and that'll open up the participant window. Navigate to the bottom of that panel and you'll see raise hand. Click the raise hand button and you'll enter the queue to start the discussion. Thanks.
Good, and I see people are raising their hands. We will do, as our agenda says, a few minutes of stakeholder questions, and then we will open to public comment. Those of you who are a public comment are in the Zoom as attendees and can also be chatting and asking questions. We are starting to see those come in, and that's very helpful to us and get ready to address them in public comment. Okay, Nelson, who's got their hand raised?
Judy's first in the queue.
All right, Judy Thomas, we are opening it up for you to ask your question. Need you to unmute, Judy? She's muted.
Yeah,
Do you need to unmute, Judy? There we go. Give us 1 second while we use all these fancy technology tools to unmute. Judy, we see Jeannie, we see Peter Hansel, Nina Weiler-Harwell, and we are doing our best to unmute you to ask your questions.
I think we'll move back to Judy. Let's move on to Jeannie.
Hi, this is Jeannie Parker Martin. I have a number of different questions. So first I want to say this was an excellent presentation. Each of you were really clear. I like the idea of the 5 objectives with 5 recommendations in each of the objective areas. That was really clear and helpful. If you had to identify the top 5 priority recommendations that you thought policymakers should act on now, I believe that the SAC had requested a prioritization, which this feels a bit like a prioritization of the recommendations because there's a much longer list. Would you be able to identify the top 5 priority recommendations that policymakers could act on now?
Hi, Jeannie, this is Susan DeMorris, and that's an excellent question that is top of mind for many of us. I would go back to the graphic, and something that we think is important is that all of these issues are interrelated and connected, and in part laying this out as the 5 big ideas. There's been a lot of thought to advancing and elevating one idea from each of those areas so that we lift our whole system up at the same time. And with 140 recommendations in this report, I can say that what made it to the slides absolutely would be the highest priorities. It doesn't give you 5, but in each slide we did call out the top level recommendations. And so it's among those that we would be narrowing to 5 to answer your question. And then it would of course depend on if it's the top 5 ideas for this, the budget that will be determined in June of this year, or if it's the top 5 ideas for the 10-year plan. So the guardrails would dictate what gets moved forward, but we can tell you that the slides do represent probably the highest level thinking and the issues that surfaced over and over again in public comment, stakeholder input, and at the committee level.
Great. And then I have, that's very, very helpful. Thank you, Susan. I have 2 other questions if I can ask them now. I have the line. Is that all right to ask 2 other questions?
Sure.
Okay. My second question relates to a comment that was made at the beginning in the opening statements that related to a cabinet level position for aging. And then later in objective number 5, I think it was objective number 5, there was mention of an LTSS unit at the agency secretary level. Are those related recommendations or are they different recommendations? And I just want to understand kind of what was being, the first one was an opening comment not related to the LTSS recommendations as far as I can tell. So if you could just...
Oh, I'm sorry. This is Claire. I can answer that. So I think they're related, but they are definitely different. The aging cabinet level secretary sort of initial comment really is focused on a broader aging lens and a person with disabilities lens, so that we're really talking about somebody having the sort of the whole picture in their purview. The cross department unit within Health and Human Services is a little more, not a little more, it is more targeted to say there's all these different departments currently working on LTSS issues, and generally they're doing that within their own silo. And what we'd really love to see is a lot more coordination and sort of the whole system working well together. And we think that needs sort of the sort of functional place of people within departments being able to come together to look at the policies, see how things work together, make sure that care is being offered in a way that makes sense for the people who are using it. So they would be different recommendations, and we really think potentially the cabinet level aging secretary might end up being a SAC level recommendation versus an LTSS recommendation, since it wasn't specific to that.
Sure, great thought and great comments. Thank you. And then my final question relates to the statewide universal benefit, which has been discussed, I know, quite significantly and for a while. Did you talk at all about how that either compares, complements, maybe even conflicts with CalAIM?
Hi, Jeannie, this is Sarah. Thank you, that's a great question. I would say this, you know, with the CalAIM initiative and the proposal that follows, it's geared at innovating and restructuring the Medi-Cal program to promote a more person-centered service delivery system and looking at the needs of the whole person. And there's certainly a lot of opportunities in that, and we did talk about that at length in our discussion around system integration and issues impacting dual eligibles. But with the LTSS benefit, it's for the individuals who are not yet eligible for Medi-Cal. So it is the population of people who would not yet be eligible for the CalAIM proposals and the initiatives. So it's essentially that part of the population that's potentially near Medi-Cal or middle class, and with the goal of helping them avoid impoverishment so that they can access LTSS according to their needs and preferences. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Sarah. Thank you.
Okay, and we have 5 SAC members and 10 minutes. So each of you will now get 2 minutes, and it looks like we got Judy unmuted. Judy.
Hi, yeah, you can hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so I wanted to say again, you know, as Jeannie did, this report looks great. It's gotten stronger every time the versions come out, so kudos to those who've worked on it. I have a question which maybe sounds a little weird, but I have been assuming, because this is the master plan on aging, that when we're talking about people with disabilities, we mean adults. But when you look at the IHSS programs and some of these other things we may be talking about, it might also apply to children with adults, so I mean with disabilities. Is there any thought around that?
This is Claire again. I think we have tried to be very aware that some of these programs, especially IHSS, do cut into a child population, and there are some targeted recommendations to improving some aspects. Just an example is improving parent-provider rules within IHSS. But I think generally our conversations have more closely targeted adults with disabilities and older adults. But to be very clear, because I think there was a comment about this, the report is meant to be inclusive of both those communities and very robustly focused on both and not to the detriment of either. So yeah, I think there are a few things that involve kids, but that really hasn't been our heavy focus and is definitely, I don't think, the general expertise of the group, although like someone like Catherine obviously has a ton of expertise in those areas as well. So we have tried to be thoughtful, but not overly focused given our expertise.
Yeah, that's helpful. We probably just at one point, we just want to make sure that we're not unintentionally making changes to the pediatric population that might hurt them. I noticed that the graphic was changed from the last one that was presented. So because the last one had the circle and some other pieces to it, and this is the circle which has been modified. So is this the complete graphic here?
As of now, it is, yes. You know, we are always iterative in our work, I think, but by the time we have all the layout and the design and the formatting with quotes interspersed throughout the report, it could be that we make tweaks to the graphics. So if people have feedback, we always love hearing that feedback, please. And a big thank you to AARP for dedicating their graphic designer resources to development of that.
Thank you.
I'm going to keep us moving. Peter Hansel. Unmute, Peter. Peter, it looks like it's on your end, perhaps.
Peter, are you muted?
And yeah, Peter needs to,
Peter.
Nina, you're next. If you can unmute, or Marty Lynch could unmute themselves.
There's Nina.
There's Nina. You win, though.
Yay.
Go ahead.
So I just have a couple of comments. First of all, such a great group to have worked with, and especially the writing team. You were all my sheroes and my role models. So I just want to bring up a couple of things within government organization. I know at one point the language had said something about more of an interagency process, facilitating that. Is that going to be more moved over into the major SAC process? I know I had made suggestions around that language and making sure there was an official interagency implementation process.
Hi, Nina. This is Susan DeMorris. Our thinking on that is for LTSS, almost everything falls under the Health and Human Services Agency, and that's where we focused our work. I would imagine that the Stakeholder Advisory Committee might have some recommendations along with the cabinet about interagency collaboration and cooperation, but we stayed focused on the Health and Human Services Agency.
Okay. Yeah, just I know we don't have a lot of time, but just really quick, there'll be pieces from other departments that we need to be looking to, like transportation and housing.
Absolutely.
Okay, and then the other thing I just wanted to raise was just clarification. Many of us submitted fairly detailed recommendations, and those will go in an appendix. Where are those going to show up? Because I know that one of the recommendations I submitted, which the front end, the summary is in this report, but it turned out the back end, the big long recommendation that we all did not show up online. So that will show up in a report somewhere, correct? All the really thoughtful recommendations we did, not just these summaries.
Yeah, hi Nina, it's Sarah. Yes, we need to figure out and work with our state partners to figure out how to facilitate that. But yes, that's been the idea the whole time, that we would have an appendix that links to every single comment reviewed on each of these categories. So great point, and that's something that we'll figure out in the next few weeks.
Thank you. All right, thanks.
Hey, Peter, you look unmuted.
Peter
Peter
Hansel,
Hansel, you're up.
he's typing.
Okay. Any luck?
Yeah, you're here. We hear you.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So I just want to first extend my commendations to the amazing work that we've got in front of us, and the thoughtfulness, the continuity, the thematic links that are in it are, I think, are really right on. I think my thoughts are kind of going along the lines of the questions and comments about the prioritization process and ranking that has been discussed. And I guess I'm kind of struggling a little bit with how to approach that. I kind of hear an interest in trying to pick some of the 140 recommendations out and moving those up. But that troubles me a little bit because of the fragmentation that can create and the discontinuity, and I think that's a point Susan made. But then I also hear, another approach could be hit them more at a top line, overall at the objective level. And I think that's great because it's inclusive, but it's not quite as action-oriented in terms of specific directions. So I guess my question is have you given thought to another approach to how to prioritize, or that could possibly be developing some other criteria that could be things like, well, what could we do in the near term versus what takes longer, what is relatively affordable fiscally, what might fit into the fiscal picture sooner as opposed to later, what are the low-hanging fruit, where do you get the biggest bang for the buck, that kind of thing. That's kind of where my mind goes, which could be pulling stuff out of each of the 5 areas, but looking at more kind of in a sequencing mode, like what would happen first, what would need to happen first to get the ball rolling. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, Peter, this is Lydia. I appreciate those comments. Send them in to us. We definitely have talked about this as we've turned our attention from the organizing of the report now to get into actionable items. And your thoughts are exactly along the lines of what we've been discussing. Sequencing what's actionable now, what can really make a difference in this next budget year, for example, to really move the ball forward. So we've looked at also things like what would be something that could be done administratively with a wave of the wand, what's going to require legislation, are there regulatory barriers? So we're also looking at it through that lens as well as the equity lens. So all those thoughts are on the table right now, and we've actually started, thanks to Claire, we've started a worksheet where we're starting to lay these things out and try to organize them in a fashion that makes sense relative to your comments and our thinking. So appreciate your kind of, you're kind of underscoring some of the thought process we've gone through. So that's appreciated.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
That's also what the SAC planning group is asking, and what Jeannie's asking for this exercise of send us your ideas. Send it to Jeannie. That was on the slide and on the chat box, and we can reinforce that as kind of an exercise for SAC to try as well, so that we can have a great discussion on Monday. Mm-hmm. We are at time, but I want to recognize the 3 other SAC members. If you can please be brief, and if we get long, we will put it into chat and comment and try to answer online. Marty Lynch, you're unmuted, and Mercedes Kerr and Clay Kemp, you'll be next. So get ready. But Marty, you're up.
Okay, thank you. Great work, everybody. I just wanted to ask a couple of questions. Number one, I noticed that the Medi-Cal integration strategy is separated from the Medicare, use of Medicare LTSS. And well, you may not have time to comment on that now, but I'd love to see them as part of an overall approach. We'll see if there's time for comment. And then the second issue, I just wanted to note, I lost track, and there's different places in the report about state level integration of departments, and then recommendations about county level. I noted that especially at the county level, but I hope this will be an issue at the state level too, that health is included with aging and adult services in terms of trying to get a seamless service for our consumers. So I want to say plan at the state level together, including health, because all the dollars and many of the services are there, but also at the local level, same thing. Dollars and many of the services are there. So I don't know if there's any quick response on that one, but I'll put my 2 cents in on that. Thank you.
I think the 2 cents have been received. There's a lot of nodding happening in the room, and because of time, we'll come back to that. But thank you, Marty. Nodding is happening. Mercedes and Clay, are either of you able to unmute yourselves and ask your question? It's the hardest part.
Clay and Mercedes.
Both of you. Okay. Mercedes, you were up in the queue first. Mercedes Kirk.
Uh-oh.
Not hearing you yet.
Mercedes?
Clay, let's give it a try. Clay, are you there?
I hope I'm there. You guys got me?
Yep, go for it.
Okay, so I was going to say the same thing as Marty said about the local coordination, that healthcare should be certainly part of that discussion. And I would add transportation as another part. If we really want to integrate and better coordinate, let's bring everybody to the table, not just who, is county-based or AAA-based.
Good point.
So that's my first one. The second one is looking at 1A4. Am I in the right place here?
Just say which one.
I'm
Okay.
getting myself lost. Yeah, about developing statewide quality standards for INA. I think that needs to be tweaked to say provide adequate resources to support quality standards for INA, because until we do that, adding the additional standards is just going to kill INA in rural communities. There's simply, no money to do any of that work. So I tweak the language there. If we don't tweak it, I'm actually opposed to that recommendation, simply because you won't be able to do it on a local level if you're talking about a small community.
Got it. Mercedes, any success in unmuting? Okay. And
All right, I'm going to throw one more out there then.
No, Clay, if you don't mind, please come in the comment or chat because we're at public comment. And while we transition to public comment, Cheryl Brown, one of our SAC members, has also said a little more clarification on the middle class would be helpful. That's the feedback from Cheryl Brown. Okay, so as we transition to public comment, Nelson, you have the similar advice about raising your hand. We have 67 attendees here. We have 3, 4, 5 hands up. While that's happening, let me just share some of the feedback that's come in during the conversation. A participant named W again asked the question about aging and disability and making sure we're clear. The first sentence of the report does speak to that, and it's woven throughout, but just a reminder. That came up again. Lorinda asked a question that has come up in many meetings. What about related issues? For example, healthy aging or housing and transportation. And again, this work is really focused on the goal 1, services and supports, home and community-based services, assistance with daily needs that allow us all to live in our homes of choice. But absolutely, aging is so much more. And the goal 2 work on healthy aging, the goal 3 work on livable communities, the goal 4 work on security and safety are all moving forward. Next, powered by your comments and recommendations, Webinar Wednesdays, those SAC work groups are hitting the ground, and you'll be hearing more from them at the May SAC, which also somehow is going to be here before you know it. And then a couple comments have really raised the important issue of dementia, whether Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, all cognitive issues. It's come up from a couple people, making sure that we're speaking to caregivers, making sure that we're doing public education, making sure that we're speaking to Latino and other communities that are disparately impacted by Alzheimer's. This, of course, is a top priority of both the master plan and the governor's task force on Alzheimer's and prevention. And it is both woven throughout LTSS, but I'm speaking to it because it's woven throughout the master plan for aging. Every recommendation and goal will speak to that population. And then finally, lots of requests for making sure the family caregiver, the unpaired caregiver gets more. Of course, these slides were just the highlights. There is much more in the report speaking to all, and by family, of course, family of choice, family and friends are circles, the importance of unpaid caregiving, as Susan said, the backbone. So just a flavor of the comments that have come in by chat and Q&A. And let's see now for some of the hands raised. Who do we have?
Lana Berger, first in line. Go ahead, Lana.
Hello, I think that you're calling on me.
Yes, Ilana Berger, we hear you.
So I'm always coming up with Ilana Berger because I use her Zoom, but this is Lindsay Imai Hong. I'm with the California Domestic Workers Coalition. I'm also with Hand in Hand.
Welcome.
So I apologize. I can put my full name into the chat box so you have the spelling of it correctly. So I just wanted to first commend the work that's been done, and also the emphasis on the need for improved working conditions to attract and retain the needed workforce, as well as supports for unpaid family caregivers. But I wanted to make my full comment on the excitement we have around a universal LTSS benefit. We see in our work every day families who are really struggling, individuals with disabilities and older adults struggling to afford the long-term services and supports that they need to be able to live and age in their homes and communities. And I wanted to encourage this body, both bodies, the subcommittee and the full SAC, to put in stronger language that really commits to the universality of a benefit that goes beyond the Washington model, so that this benefit will support people who can't pay into a payroll tax, such as older adults who are already retired, people with developmental disabilities, perhaps, who were cut out of the Washington model. So wanted to stress really making it a universal benefit. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your comment and for that follow-up on getting your name and title right. Let's see who else's hand is raised. The screen name here is Arivas, A-R-I-V-A-S.
Yes, that's me.
Great.
How you doing? One of the questions that I have, mainly my concern, is that some of the Spanish-speaking community that have Parkinson's disease and not able to have enough workers that speak the language. And at the same time that I see some of the insurances in Medicare not be able to pay for it, whatever they need to do. Sometimes, you know, the Spanish-speaking community, they need to go to like, maybe like Gold's Gym into to do walking or do some exercises within the Spot Fitness. And some of the insurances have taken away, you know, be able to pay for that service. And Medicare, I think they don't pay for that either. So I just want to know, how can you, as you talk to ARP and other insurances, be able to provide that service in which they don't have to pay for it? Because they used to have the sneakers, and then they took it away, and then I don't know if they put it back again. So a lot of the insurances that have ARP, they were very upset in regard to that matter, because they could no longer be able to go, they had to pay for it now. So my question will be is to be able that all insurances that getting, you know, like ARP, they pay for it, should provide the fees for going to the spa, to going to Gold Gym, so they can be able to receive some of the exercises and at the same time services that they, you know, the Spot Fitness or Gold Gym provide. Even though they pay for it, but also for the people that cannot, you know, maybe Medicare can be able to, you know, if the doctor has a prescription in which they need to go to those kind of services, they should, you know, at least, you know, pay for it. What is your answer in regard to that matter?
Thank you for that. The group has been brainstorming both policy and individual solutions. And I think the first tip is that your local HICAP provider, HICAP, can provide Medicare counseling and options about what's possible with Medicare. From a policy perspective, absolutely hear you. People are taking that in for feedback on the Medicare piece, the diverse communities, the provider training, physical fitness. There was really a lot in that comment. So thank you very much for that. We've got, we'll unmute Kevin next in 1 second, and I'll just say the comments on unpaid workforce continue to come in. A suggestion of a family caregiver tax credit from one of our callers, and then Mercedes Kerr, our SAC member who had audio difficulties, says, don't forget the employer-funded adult care programs and how those can be a complementary solution as well. So thank you, Mercedes, for using your Q&A box when the microphone didn't work. How about Kevin?
Hey everyone, this is Kevin Pruneville. I'm on the SAC, so I'll defer to the public comment since we're in the public comment. I just wanted to say thanks and great job to the group that's been working on this. You've done us a great service with the prioritization you've done.
Thank you, Kevin.
Other public comment, either by raising your hands or the webinar chat or the Q&A. We have another SAC member with her hand up, but I want to wait 1 second and see if there's public of our 62 folks who are still with us, any other comments to share? Hearing none, Cheryl Brown, SAC member, you're unmuted.
Hi, how are you? Thank you so much. All I wanted to do, I've written my comments in the comment section, but I just wanted to say thank you. You guys did a great job. And I'm as a SAC member, very, very proud to be able to come back and look at this with the SAC group. So thank you very much. It was great.
Thank you. Well, and that's a great segue. Debbie Toth, who's also a SAC member. If Nelson, if you can scroll up her comment. If you can scroll up, please. My goodness, there's so many comments. There it is. Debbie says, I just want to share my deep gratitude for the work and partnership that went into this phenomenal piece of work. I understand there are differing viewpoints, yet you were able to find the intersections in very short order. Kudos and huge snaps to you all. Heart emoji, thumbs up emoji.
Thanks, Deb. I love it.
First emoji public comment. So congratulations. Congratulations.
Leave it to Debbie.
Yeah, okay. If there are other public comments to come in just for a minute, I will go ahead and say that the most important next step is to join us on Monday, March 2nd. Is our all-day SAC meeting where this will be the bulk of the agenda, the discussion of this report and the action on the agenda with SAC and LTSS members. As always, in person and Zoom are there. And those of you who are from SAC have the additional homework from your peer, Jeannie Parker Martin, that we're scrolling back to. A couple more, we're almost there. To the homework slide, a couple more, keep going, keep going. One more, there it is. Jeannie wants to know, having heard this great presentation, having seen this report and have this just flavor of discussion, if you can send her tonight what you think are the top opportunities for policymakers to act on now. And again, that's just a Kickstarter of our discussion on Monday. No decision, no consultation. Highlighted in blue by our amazing technical team, Nelson and Ellen. Thank you so much. With that, having no further comment, thank you again to all the teamwork and the hard work, and look forward to the work to come. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Question, Kim?